what have you done for me lately? It's Coons, what have y'all done for us lately? And if there's no answer, the only thing we owe them.
Welcome all. Great day, beautiful Wednesday, beautiful, really nice outside. If you live in certain parts of the country, and if you live in that Northeast, you got nothing but rain, but it was due. Well, tonight in the Academia Report, we continue to have our discussion talking about the Negro Family, the case for national action, which is also known as the Monahan Report. This will be a wrap up of that, the Monahan Report, as we segue into the Kerner Report, which we decided to put them together because you would think that they're very similar and they addressed certain needs and the pros for some. For one, is actually most people during that time were upset with, like I said, the Monahan Report, the case for national action, which was called the Negro Family, where President Johnson at the time was trying to address the war on poverty, addressing what was going on definitely in these inner cities and very, very urban areas of, why in the quote unquote industrial age, we still had a large segment of our population who didn't have the means, resources, and so forth to live above the median. So we have Professor Andrea here. She's ready for you guys, prepared and ready to go. What's up, Drea?
What's up, Q? What's up, Let's Talk family? Hopefully, y'all did your homework so you can participate in a discussion.
Yeah, you had discussed last week. I remember the homework actually because I had actually used one of the clips for the homework. And the homework you said to really, really go through this report, the Negro Family, the case for national action.
Hmm.
So in our last discussion, we were talking and we were sharing some things with the chat, some experiences, and really trying to understand the pros and cons of this report, allegedly. So, what's your thoughts going into our discussion today on it?
So I went to go revisit the report myself, and I've been on travel and just comparing the report to a place that I traveled to and looking at have that report, civil rights, and just our condition in 2026. When I'm saying our condition as Black people, as Americans, haven't really changed, and I would definitely say it's been more of a decline because of just even I'm looking at structurally, the foundation of, the fabric of being Black American, and I live in the deep South of looking at the conditions here where I live at, and also all over. And I think people just think, well, I'm okay individually and my family's okay. But when you look at your neighborhood or the neighborhood that you did black flight, because I have this thing that Black people, once they get education, they get a little bit of money, they have this black fight from where they had actually grew up at. It's not okay. And you see a lot of I know where I was at, a lot of abandoned buildings, a lot of people who, have addiction issues, mental health issues, broken families. And so we're not okay. And so where have civil rights actually had helped us when we still have people who are getting elected? When I'm saying people like Black Americans who's being elected into, let's say, being chief police or mayors or governors. When you look around, it's only one Black governor in the whole United States of America. And whenever you see Black governors, right? I mean, Black, excuse me, mayors, the city is in decline. And I always like look at it like, well, if the city's in decline and they're taking over, they kind of want you to go ahead and destroy it, and then they're going to come back in and rebuild it. So where have civil rights have really benefited us as people, as a collective, not individually?
When you say that, and for the listener that doesn't understand why we're deciding to talk about this issue, and most people will say, how dare you disrespect our elders, our ancestors, by speaking ill of the civil rights movement? A lot of people died, people were murdered, assassinated, in jail, fought. But when you look at the combustion of the 60s, the civil rights movement started way before the 60s. It started, literally during chattel slavery. But when you look at the 60s, so many things happened. And President Johnson deciding to get Monahan to do this report in 1965 is interesting because it came during, Vietnam is here. So now it's like, a lot of people use the quote unquote armed services as a career, and they were drafted and people's families was going over there. So when you look back at it with a 2026 lens, you'll say, okay, well, we know the Supreme Court, because of the case with the Asian Americans, the Supreme Court, quote unquote, gutted civil rights, and people said that, oh, the Supreme Court is dismantling stuff. But the reality, when they first presented the Civil Rights Bill, it was speaking about a specific group of people and addressing the needs of specific group of people. And the language was so broad. And we'll probably go over the Civil Rights Act with a fine tooth comb eventually. But the language was so broad, so many different people benefited from something that was not specifically addressed for them.
Mm-hmm.
And nowadays we're here at this moment where people who are continuously advocating for civil rights, uh, a lot of people who speak on the matters of voter rights. Um, I don't want to say the word DEI, but DEI, and trying to really get it to benefit people who are disenfranchised. The reality is that we're no different than we were prior to those times.
Mm-hmm.
The country is not as quote unquote divided as far as racial tension, but it's still here, but it's not as bad as it once was.
Exactly. And like we talked about, I believe in the last episode of when we look at the definition of civil rights, it doesn't say anything about race, right? It doesn't say anything about ethnicity or culture. Civil rights can be anything dealing with accommodations of those who may need accommodations in a wheelchair or hard of hearing or deaf or blind. So, when we think about civil, that covers the umbrella of, it's a broad umbrella. So that's why I always tell you all to do your homework and look up these definitions and to see, is it people first? And it's people first, no doubt, it's positive language, but we have to be more intentional of the word that we use to have rights for ourselves. Like you have the anti hate bill or the Asian bill, right? That covers a group of people, that covers, ethnicity, race. When it comes to civil, it's like, okay, all these people can fall under this umbrella. It doesn't mean that it's a Black American bill and they are a protected class and they have, let's say, so many different quotas that they have to meet in a job for African Americans, or even for housing, or even when it comes to home ownership loans, or whatever the case is. Because even if we talk about that, home ownership has been on a decline after civil rights. Because I remember they did I was looking at a study and it was saying like in the past 60 years, it's only about like 30% of Black folks who even own a home, and it takes sometimes a lot to even own a home or go even get pre-qualified or pre-approved, right? And a lot of banks are still not qualifying us. So, once again, who are the civil rights bill really benefiting from? And I can't wait till we go over it in detail, because people just hear the word and think, oh, it's just for Black folk, and it's not.
Yeah, even if you thought it was just for Black indigenous Americans, Black descendants of chattel slavery, the reality is that it never it never addressed those people. It never addressed the people that it was intended for. And it's like, blood, sweat, and tears for nothing. And I'm not saying it's for nothing, but when you look at the teeth and the dent that it has really impacted families, like you said, we're in a worse condition as if they did a Monahan report nowadays in war on poverty, you would see that the wealth gap has actually grown.
Mm-hmm.
You would see that single parent homes have actually grown. You will see right after the Monahan and right after the academic the Negro Family, the case for national action, and I like to call it that. I don't like to say the Monahan report because basically people might get it confused with the Kerner report. When the Kerner report came out, then some things was unleashed on these very disenfranchised communities. Drugs was unleashed on these communities and mass incarceration.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't really positive action being taken. One of the things that we need to really be able to have is these conversations that may make some of our elders uncomfortable, may make
Mm-hmm.
some people now that feel like we as Black Americans taking victory laps for our mobility, but the reality is that we're still in the same situation. So I have some cons that we can discuss talking about uh, the Negro Family, the case for national action, the Monahan Report, right? And the tangle of pathology. We discussed this 2 weeks ago. And the language that he used when he said that, he tied single parent homes and the condition of the poverty, as he said, they intermingled with each other. And a lot of detractors to his report were highly upset with the language that he used, him being a psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
He was a psychologist. He just happened to have been in the Department of Labor.
Right.
So, for someone who is in the study of social worker work, you have your master's degree and professor and have long history of this. Discuss the usage, like you said, the uses of these type of words when you're describing a condition of a set of people.
Definitely. So I think let's talk about pathology again. So people think pathology is only dealing with a biological, biochemical aspect of us. Whether we are studying the diseases. So that's what pretty much pathology is. But it deals with the pathology of people. Of just the disease of, it could be disease of poverty, why people are poor. I remember that was a question I had to answer when I was in undergrad school. Like, well, why people are poor? Is it based off of a system? Is it based off of that individual person? So it brings me back to that question. And it's like, when you think about it, is it a disease? And like I mentioned before, when we think about pathology, it's like that's a contaminated group, because when you think about studying diseases, you're studying things that's contaminated. You're studying things that's like a control group. Then you're studying a group that haven't been contaminated by, let's say, the first petri dish of folks who's been contaminated. So that goes back to, when we look at people, we got to look at the whole holistic person in an environment, right? Just because one may have been grew up in a condition of poverty doesn't mean that they are going to grow up and become an adult and still be in that condition of poverty. So once again, it's all about pathology. Are you willing to cure? Are you willing to cure that? And for curing that, of course, that's going to take a lot of you ripping the root issue and really replanting your roots elsewhere. But it takes a lot to rip up the root issue instead of just always being a study, right? Because also too, when you're studying, that's the LOGY. you're studying something. Okay, when we going to get past the study and actually do something now? When it comes to a disease or just even a contaminated group, because at this point in time, when we think about the Monahan report, he's looking at black folks as a contaminated group. Like they can't pull themselves up by the bootstrap. They're the issue. Stay away from them, right? And so when we get a group of people who, let's say, migrate here from different countries, we're always the target of stay away from that group. You can have your businesses in that group, even though they are quote unquote group of disease, they're contaminated, but don't live amongst that group. Don't do anything else besides that group because they're only meant to be consumers of a product instead of actually being helped or actually, being able to help their community. So that's how I look at it when it comes to, once again, the wording. We have to be very careful of the wording. And that's why, once again, I'm going to say go look up pathology and really sit with that word and think of it like, okay, what groups have been quote unquote a pathology or a contaminated group in this country? So don't look at it from a sense from a medical or clinical standpoint. Look at it from a social science, lens.
One of the other issues, and like you said, with using this terminology, it led to fall back into stereotypical behavior, stereotypical language, where a person that's reading it that doesn't understand that will begin to have reinforced beliefs, concepts, thoughts on based upon stereotypes. One of the other issues, and we're going to go through it because we don't want to have people here. We want you guys in the chat to engage and give us your thoughts. You may have been remembered during this time, and tell us what you think, whether you agree with our assessment or not. When you do have something to add, just put it in the chat. One of the other things that he did in the report, it downplayed housing discrimination. And the reason what's interesting about housing discrimination is we know that a lot of the Great Migration up north was going on. And a lot of those people believed in what we consider upward mobility. So they were getting the jobs in the factory. They were, as that phrase, pulling themselves by the bootstrap. That's what they were doing. However, when it was time to buy homes, redlining was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And you can Google, anybody in the chat, you can literally Google the town that you live in, and it'll show you where it was redlined in the various town that you was living in. It was a very, very common practice, housing discrimination. And in the report, one of the cons they said was that he downplayed housing discrimination.
Right. Exactly.
Mm.
And like you say, you can Google your zip code, and also too it will tell you about the resources. So when you know that you're living in a resourceful community, you have a hospital nearby, you don't have a food desert, you're nearby plenty of grocery stores. Also too, look at the school system, how much of your taxes is paying into the school system. Think about your property taxes. Think about the houses that's around in your neighborhood. How many abandoned buildings or houses. So you got to think about the resources. Also too, another thing I had learned about when it comes to redlining, you even have redlining when it comes to your utility bills. So if you live on let's say where I live at, I live on the southeast side. Now, if I was to go west side of my city I live in, their utility bills are higher because they don't have much green space. Anytime you have a lot of green space, that's pretty much you live in a nice, I don't want to like a affluent, more wealthier, more resourceful neighborhood. Anytime that you live in a redlining community, your utility bills is always going to be higher. You don't have much green space. You don't have accessibility to, let's say, even transportation, a grocery store that's going to have quality of produce or food. And also, too, it's probably not a walkable city. A lot of times when you have a walkable city and you have accessibility to like parks and places you can go outside and really just have more of a quality of air and a quality of life, that is also considered redlining. And I don't think people understand how deep it goes when it comes to redlining. When a neighborhood has been decimated by a highway, that means your neighborhood has been divided of like, okay, the have and the have nots. When that highway is getting instituted in your neighborhood, that means that people are getting pushed out, and now your neighborhood is you're being outpriced in your own neighborhood to go elsewhere.
Yeah, and that's important for you guys in the chat. I mean, you guys probably know more about your personal. You definitely know more about your personal situation than me and Professor Drea. But like she said, a lot of the things happen with what they call with these highways, what they deemed as what they call as urban renewal. Urban renewal upheaval. You can Google urban renewal. Like these were set, and this is where even in the Negro Family, the case for national action, one of the cons that a lot of the detractors had during this moment was the downplaying. They felt like Monahan downplaying systemic and institutional control over the studies and the action that was going on. Because the action, when you look at chattel slavery, Jim Crow, uh, you know, voter suppression, major voter suppression that was going on back then, because most people don't realize that you were a black man that owned land, you could vote back then. When you pull it all the way up to the 60s and understanding what was going on during that, you have to understand that the systems, and this is where when you hear people talk about WS, it's not talking about a specific person, it's talking about the systems that are in place. And it's very important that we get to understand it, because you may be on the outside and be like, I don't see the system. I don't see, where it's a hindrance. But when you're put in a situation or placed in a situation from urban renewal, from basically what they turned into modernized housing projects, which was one of the worst ideas they probably ever did in the country, it was design housing projects. And you live in a home or an apartment and you don't have access. You basically, me and Drea did a conversation about food deserts. These type of environments play a major part on shaping who you are. There are a lot of people who are exception to the rule that may make it out. However, when they do studies and they critique and they look at people that live in these areas, it's a reason why they are in the condition that they're in.
Absolutely. And I don't think people understand like food deserts is a major thing because if you don't have food and you have children, they're going to school hungry. And then a lot of these programs are being cut as far as with the food, the free or reduced lunches at school and breakfast is being cut. And so what's going to happen, with your children if that's the only means that they're going to be able to eat? And sometimes that breakfast and lunch at school is the only means that children are able to eat. And you still have children who are still at the under the poverty level. And it is a large percentage. And you all can go back and check out our video about that. But once again, that's cause of redlining in the neighborhood that you live in because if you only accessible to a bodega or a corner store, they're not getting quality food. And a lot of times in the school systems, the food is not all that nutritious or quality as well. Or even if these programs are getting cut, then what? What are you gonna? How are you going to feed your children? And especially if you're dependent on SNAP. So it's a whole, we can go down a rabbit hole when it comes to a lot of these programs. A lot of these programs, as far as with SNAP benefits, free or reduced lunch, the policies have not been looked at in like over, you talking about 60 years. A lot of these policies was actually implemented during FDR administration, right? And they really have not been looked at like, okay, how can we make changes? Even when it comes to Social Security, a lot of our elders may be on Social Security and that's what they only living on. And, they may should be getting more. But of course, when you look at policies affect our whole entire life. I always say that, people talk about racism, and I said, you can verbally say something to people all day, every day. Racism is when policies affect your life on a day to day basis. That's graduate school level policy. And I don't think people understand the difference between, yeah, somebody can call you out your name, but when it's affecting your housing, your quality of life, um, once again, the black family, from generations, that's when you need to pay attention. You need to really step up and, advocate for a better quality of life. And pretty much that's what the Monahan Report is about. Is pretty much policies, not being addressed as the pathology is actually the person.
All right, we have a couple statements here, Dre. I know you like this when the chat integrates their conversation and thoughts with our show. I know this is something that you like. Fred X 1853 said, Do you both think the areas that have been redlined should be designated and protected like reservations for gentrification? If so, why haven't our black political leaders created legislation? Um, I do think those areas, I do think the redlining and the housing discrimination is an issue that continues to go on even to this day, where when you look at this report, when you look at the current report, it's always, and FedEx, you'll understand the language that I'm even going to use now. It's always a study. That's all we ever hear when you're talking about really, really doing something in our country. It's always a study when you're talking about Black Americans. I mean, I'm not trying to be funny, but it's always a study. It's never legislation that's going to be transformative towards addressing the core problems and the core issues. So when we say why none of the black leaders, just look at them now. They'd rather complain about Trump instead of saying, I'm going to use my congressional power to author a bill. I'm going to politic and do what politicians do, try to get support behind the bill, and I'm going to present it to no matter what party they're in. And this is what a politician's supposed to be doing. A politician is there to politic, shake a hand, kiss babies, and make friends. Not say, I'm going to punt and take a pass and not deal with the president because I don't like what party he is. I don't like what the rhetoric they have. I mean, we all know about Lyndon Johnson. We all know how Lyndon Johnson felt.
Mm-hmm.
And those leaders, those civil rights leaders in the 60s, and as we're critiquing those issues, those civil rights leaders didn't care about all that.
Right.
They had no problem with organizing. And if they chose to get into politics, they were like, yo, we ain't getting into politics unless we try to get some stuff passed. If you look back at Adam Clayton Powell, before he passed, he got the most legislation passed that he authored out of any black politician.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, you can't ask FedEx, you can't ask 5 people. Yo, what bill did Maxine Waters author? And I'm not taking a shot at it. I'm just being honest. What bill did Sheila Lee author? What bill did Cory Booker pass? What did he author? Not co-sign the bill, not sign the bill. It's different. We're talking about authoring bills. Instead, they'd rather, do what they do for their special interests.
Right.
Okay. Dre, he said, you realize far more poor white people were affected by redlining than black people, right? I absolutely don't know that. There's
I
no
don't.
proof that you're saying
Yeah.
what you're saying.
And I don't know the stats on that. And of course, it's more white people in this country than black people. And also too, but a lot of times y'all gotta think you got this thing called privilege. Even if you are living, let's say, next door to someone who is also that's a poor African American, does that mean you still have more of an advantage? Someone who has and there's no disrespect to anybody who have a GED, someone who's white with a GED have more of an advantage with somebody like me who has a master's degree. You will get called back for a job quicker than I will. So we don't have that stats, and that's something that we can come back and discuss the stats on that.
Oh, Sister Star is with us tonight again. Thanks, sis.
Thanks for the
She
stars.
said, good evening. In 1994, the ACLU filed a lawsuit against HUD on behalf of the Baltimore residents. The issue was public housing was placed in the poorest segregated areas. See, this has been one of the biggest trick bags, in my opinion, Sister Star, when they use words like affordable housing. What does that mean?
Right.
Because they can trick and play the game with the median in that particular area. And they'll say that the people that meet the median can afford to live there. But what happens is majority of people are living under the poverty line
Mhm.
for that particular area.
Exactly.
So it's like a game they play, and even now you don't see the ALCU, you don't see these type of outreach groups that make sure that should be protected. You don't see them fighting and putting laws in. Their hands are tied because they don't want to do nothing.
Mhm.
Even locally with the Urban League, I remember I was in the junior Urban League. You don't see nothing that the Urban League does. They just complain. They have their yearly dinner, and I addressed it. And this is strictly to the Urban League. They had their yearly dinner last year, and this was the first time in history that they did not invite the president or the vice president. They didn't invite them. Like, if you are a representative of a particular group, and you've been put there by a particular group, not meeting with the president for your personal reasons, you have done a disservice for your group. And you see that a lot of these so-called, back to Fred's question, a lot of these so-called organizations, Congressional Black Caucus and all that, they're mum. They're
Mhm.
not saying nothing. So them not being active, they're just as complicit as just the harm that may be being done to you.
Absolutely. And going back to Fred's question about the reservations and gentrification, if we can touch on that a little bit. And when we think about reservations with our indigenous folks, they often too are in areas that once again lack resources. We don't hear nothing about what's going on reservations about, they're getting money that's profiting from the casino. We hear about more of addictions as far as with they have lack of resources. It may be they may be going rich natural resources and people trying to go there and do the oil drilling. What are they profiting off of? So, when I think about us as black folks, let's say being a protective group and having our own piece of land, can that actually happen in the United States? I don't know because even us, when I'm saying us black people, we don't even want to go back into the neighborhood we grew up in because we think,
Mm.
oh, I made it. I don't like I said, we doing black flight. We moving out, and that's even with your mayors. That's even with your governors. They're not living in the neighborhood next to you. They living in the affluent neighborhood. And I'm talking about black mayors that I know. They don't live in the neighborhood that they grew up in. Oh no, now they'll talk about it just to have relatability. But they go look where they go live at. They're not living in the neighborhood they grew up in. So a lot of times they get in these power positions because they don't want they know what it feels like to have power and the taste of wealth. They're not trying to go back and share that with their community, even though their community propped them up to be who they are now. Hence why you see them holding on tight to, being a senator, to being a mayor because they don't want to go back to that situation. I live here in Alabama, and it's a lot of people that are Black Americans that is in powerful positions. I go look at where they're from. They would never go back to where they're from, especially like in a black belt where they're having issues with, sewer. Because I think I forgot what county it was in Lowndes County where pretty much the voter suppression, all that stuff had started down there in Selma. The senator here she would never. She's from that area and actually covers that area and have not brought resources to that area. And I'm like, how does she still get in the place of position? Because our elders sometimes because they may have help what they call it, our elders' neck. Oh yeah, she hugged my neck, so she's gonna get my vote. Nah, sis need to be up out of there because she have not
Or,
brought resources to
or
you.
they offer them a fish fry.
Right.
Even when like when Fred brings up reservations, if you guys remember the $5 Indian,
Mhm.
and even in the 80s, the particular president that we have now, if you listen to some of the hearings when he was trying to do some stuff with a casino on a reservation, there were some people that pushed back, and one of the people that pushed back, I remember the president saying, "You don't look like an Indian." And a lot of people were confused at what he was saying. It's because a lot of people from the dominant society were saying that they were indigenous, basically using the rules, regulations, and stuff that goes on the reservation, saying that they were a classified indigenous part of an indigenous tribe, and they were paying to be put down as part of an indigenous tribe. Very, very interesting corruption that goes on,
Hmm.
like in any other particular time in this country. People know how to navigate and steal from the system. So as we continue, Dre, it said here that one of the issues also was, hold on, I just saw it and I wanted to bring it up. It elevated cultural over policy debate. And the reason why I wanted to bring home this point is because we love to play gymnastics with these studies. We love to play gymnastics with the findings of the studies instead of transformative policies. We have to understand that nothing happened from this but debate.
Right.
If you look it up, it was so much dialogue around the war on poverty and this report that was done during the war on poverty. And then when people started burning up, tearing shit up, destroying cities, that's when Johnson decided to form a commission for the Kerner
Hmm.
report. And we'll
Exactly.
discuss that next week and the week after. But it's very important that we understand historically, nothing has happened. Nothing has
Hmm.
changed.
Right. Nothing has changed, but like you said, they do the trick bag with study, 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 investigate, which is pretty much the same thing. When you're doing an investigation, you're doing a study. So hence why I can say all day time blue in the face, like we need more social scientists, but would that even make a difference? Because what they're going to continue to do, they're going to study, not implement. See, we should be now in the implementation and the execution stage. We're stuck at phase one of study, assess, observe. Pretty much when you come to research, you got different stages. You know, you can collect all the quantitative and qualitative research till we blue in the face. We have those things called museums. We got archives. We got so many things that we know about our history. Some people don't know about the history, but they don't want to go to the second stage of implementation and also to execute. And like I said, when you get down to the root issue, which we know what the root issue is, now it's time to rip up the root and dismantle it. And also, too, that's when we get into the implementation stage of things, in which people, we've been having this debate about reparations forever, and there's so many people that rock with it, so many people that don't. Some people say, like, I'm not going to see it in my lifetime, but we should be moved past that stage. We don't need another study of that. We actually need implementation of relooking at policies, creating policies that specifically have wording for Black Americans in our condition, and what does that look like? Is that education? Is that housing? Is that better food quality? It should specifically be stated in these policies and actually implemented and executed on a city level, a state level, and a federal level. Because we get kind of stuck on we sometimes we don't know these different levels exist. You have your city level, which is very important because you live in that city. You have your state level because you live in that state. Then you have the federal level, which we live in the United States. And I think so many people don't know the difference. So we need it on each level versus just you just put a federal level, but is your state and also too your city going to follow up on that actual policy?
So, in with that, it was some pros. I'm gonna read off some, and then you could expound on them if you don't mind, right, Dre?
Hmm.
It said acknowledge slavery and segregation as root causes, linked economic exclusion to social consequences, warned civil rights laws alone weren't enough, highlighted unemployment among Black men, called for national government action, connected psychology to public policy, recognized generational poverty patterns, addressed labor market and discrimination, raised urgency around economic mobility, identify structural economic damage. When you let me ask you, in your studies, when we decided to go here, right? I don't know how much you knew about these two things and understanding the '60s. When you do, like you brought it up about the case for reparations, and you always hear a lot of detractors say that, I'm not paying reparations. I shouldn't have to pay for reparations. These people didn't do the free labor. But when you look back at it, even if you may feel like whatever, if you feel like about reparations, when you look at the group of people that it was caused harm to, chattel slavery, Jim Crow, lynchings, uh, redlining, there were never no corrective made. Just because it was stopped, it wasn't corrected. And when you look at the system and the policies that were not done to correct it, it makes the case for reparations more clear.
Right.
Mhm.
Exactly. And with that, we have so many, like I said, we have so many books that people been studying, that's been collecting research on. We have so many museums that shows, you know, why reparations are important and the atrocities that was done to our ancestors and that we are actually living out now. Yes, we may can go get degrees now and go live in certain neighborhoods, but there's still a emotional repair that needs to happen. There's still, structural repairs that need to happen, policy repairs, and also too, you talking about a group of people who had centuries of a head start versus we did. So it's like you cannot study that anymore because the proof is already here and it manifested in so many different ways that we physically see it, whether it's digitally or whether it's a physical thing. Other groups have received reparations, but I think about the Japanese and other, cultures of
The small
people,
hats, the small hats.
right, that came to this country, right, and look at their communities are thriving. You got communities who come here, only been here for a few years, and they once again got ownership of different resources that we need on a daily basis in our community, and we're the only ones that set back. And I know so many people say, well, you gotta stop being a victim. I heard that today. I was listening to a radio station, was talking about pretty much what we're talking about now. And it's like somebody called and said, y'all being victims, get over yourself. But when you have different barriers of opportunities, and a person can't simply even get a job, or let's say a black man can't get a job, or once again you can't move out that neighborhood based off of redlining, or when it comes to just even something as voting and all the policies and the trickery that they put in place for that. How can you just get over that and you get over the hump of having your whole community be a substance of being quality? One
You
person
had a
can't
question.
do it all.
You have a statement in question here. It's all by strategic purpose, intentionally keeping us out of places where they were hiding and discarding, destroying the truth. Why would the enemies keep us that close? Well, that's an interesting question, Barbie
Mhm.
Chick Chen, because when you think about what you're saying and understanding what we would consider black people progressing in this country, black Americans progressing in this country, we realize that before the 50s and 60s, black home ownership was up in spite of this system. And before the civil rights movement, some things got unleashed. We can talk about welfare during this report and understanding why these reports, like we said, no policy changed. They realized the ills, they saw the sickness, and nothing happened. And when you think about what happened, we were in the transition from the industrial age to the technology age. So, for example, my grandfather from the South, he moved up north. He had literally two jobs. He was what they call a custodian now, or a janitor at the Board of Education. And then he got a job at what most people would say would be a warehouse now. It was the Ford company. And he retired from Ford. He shared a car with another family. Him and his partner shared a car. My grandfather worked one shift. The other gentleman worked another shift. So, and they were both, one was from Florida, one was from Georgia, and they both bought homes for their families. And then, like I said, and then some things got unleashed. You can't survive off a single family home nowadays. It's just impossible. But we have a tendency to make struggle look good.
Mm-hmm.
We have a tendency to make struggle look good. It's very important that we understand it. Not saying that anybody wants a handout. See, and this is when conversations about reparations and what was done, nobody wants a handout.
Right.
Reparations is something that's owed, number one. And like we said, that when certain things, systems are put in place, sometimes systems are put in place to so much extreme for the average person, they will fail. Most people that make it out of certain situations are the exception to the rule. People don't make it out.
Mm-hmm.
People are not given the opportunity and or resources. And that's something that Sister Star said in the chat. Resources is the key here.
Mm-hmm.
That's the key word to when you look at anything that's going on. Look at that word resources. This is why the immigration thing is a problem right now. And the illegal immigration.
Right.
Because a lot of Americans feel, those that are not anti-immigration, anti-illegal immigration, feel as though the resources are given out to them over average Americans,
Exactly.
working hard Americans. So with that, hold on, Dre, I got some more here. Like I said, during the prose, it said, attempted structural explanation, called for infant intervention, not retreat, framed poverty as a national responsibility, sparked academic research, influenced war on poverty expansion, encouraged policy-driven solutions, recognized systemic labor exclusion, became central policy reference point.
Mm. So look what it said about research. Once again, it's coming back to that research. What are we researching again? And also, too, what's from that research, what's going to be implemented and executed at that point? We already know the destruction that has been caused. So now where's the repair at? That's what I'm talking about with implementation and with execution. We know what needs to be repaired. Now is are people willing to all collectively come together for that repair? And we already see people, oh no, my ancestors did that. I didn't do that, but they reaping the benefits from it. And we also reaping the benefits of being on the low on the caste system. And I know,
This country has been trying to figure out the correlation between crime and poverty for 70 years.
mm-hmm,
Why is certain areas high filled with crime, and how their brother and sister didn't connect? One of the issues is that you basically, you want to address a crime problem, is you allow people to have the resources towards jobs, because the majority of the time, what most of us don't understand, because a lot of us, we look at things from our Eiffel Tower, and we
mm-hmm,
look down on people that may be committing these crimes, living in densely populated areas. We don't understand that resources aspect, that
exactly.
being able to go to a fresh farm, being able to go to get fresh produce, being able to go to the supermarket. We even see now with Robert Kennedy, where he's doing his Make America Healthy Again, where literally all he's doing is asking these companies to change the ingredients. He's not forcing them to do nothing. He's asking them to change these addictive ingredients that's leading to America having an obesity problem in our country, chronic diseases. I read something that about type 2 diabetes is like 8 out of 10 people right now in the country. It's
Mm.
on the rise like crazy. So we need to understand it. Like I said, we having this discussion particularly about Black Americans, but when you look at the system, this system puts it could you could call it a caste system if you
Mhm.
like, if you want to use those words, but these systems put you in a situation where the opportunity for you to succeed, the opportunity for you as a human being to reach your full potential is not going to be realized. It's just
No,
not.
it's not. And then, like you have said, when you are put in a predicament in which you in overcrowded housing, the lack of resources in that area, you're hungry, you're gonna go out there, you're gonna rob somebody because you gotta eat. So it's like a doggy dog world. And going back to, I think we were talking about affordable housing, we gotta think too. Affordable housing means different things in different cities. Once again, I live in Alabama, and affordable housing down here, even in the city down in, it may look different compared to a city like Huntsville. That's like the top 25 cities that people are moving to because of jobs. It looks different from where I grew up in Boston because affordable housing, people who born and raised there, I got family that's still there. They can't even afford affordable housing in the city, and they got to move out, to the suburbs. And it's kind of like we doing this switcheroo, right? The folks who was living in suburbs for all these years because they did white flight, now they moving back in the city. So what, like you said, Q, what is affordable housing? It means differently for different cities, states, in towns, because the next town over, it may be, they have $700,000 homes, while you live in the city in which the homes are only worth $100,000. So it's just, you gotta look at the wordplay. You gotta look at, why is it structurally like that, and once again get into that root issue.
I don't know what this comment mean. No stop working for a car is simple. Um One of the things, even if, like I said, if you don't agree with Dre or myself, we'll have no problem with having this conversation with you in the chat. But just respect yourself with the question or the statement, or we won't even address it. Just show some respect for yourself. I don't know what that means,
Me neither.
but Drea. So, any final thoughts that you want to talk about with this particular thing?
I want you all going. Okay, so here's your other homework. So go,
Oh
not
boy, what is
only.
this? He said you don't need money to pay bills and buy a car.
Okay. And your reality. Okay. But anyways, I want you all to go and look at the words we was using. Go and look at the definition of the words. Look at what sociology is. Why do we need social scientists and psychology? And really look at structural and institutionalized racism and also policies. Also, I also want you all to look at a policy that's near and dear to you. So it could be a policy on um, ADA, Accommodations for a Disability Act. It could be SNAP, whatever. So look at a policy and see when it was implemented, see why was there a need. Also to see how things have really changed from the time it was implemented to now. Like I have to take policy classes when I was in undergrad school and graduate school, and y'all would be surprised at how a lot of these policies really have not changed, in like ever in like a century. So that's my homework to everyone. Grow your food and start working for the devil. Okay.
Once again, everybody's not afforded the resources to be able to grow their own food.
Hmm.
You may live, like I said, you may live in what they call a housing complex. You ain't growing nothing,
Mm-mm.
and you better not put no flowers out there.
Exactly.
Mm. But anyway, to wrap this up, we're gonna wrap this up for this week, and Next week we'll come back and we will discuss the Kerner report. Make sure you guys look at the Kerner report. Kerner report is very, very interesting. Like I said, um, the Negro Family, the case for national action, was based off of the war on poverty.
Mm-hmm.
A few years later, um, Americans started burning stuff down and tearing shit up in these inner cities. And President Johnson formed the Kerner Commission, and he came in with this report, what's called the Kerner Report. We're going to discuss that in its totality and really take what we call a deep dive into it and be able to have this discussion. With that, appreciate you guys in the chat. Remember to like, share, subscribe. That's the best way to support the channel. Drea, any final thoughts?
Nope, that was my final thoughts. To look up, Kerner report. Make sure you look up a policy that's near and dear to your heart, and really see have anything changed from when that report or that policy was implemented to 2026. And let's have a discussion, a honest and open discussion. No craziness. The week after next, or whenever we're gonna come back. So, peace, everyone, and have a good week.
With that, take care.